Okay, so let's start with number 12. So it's this one right here. Is everyone able to see the screen? Yes? Okay. And just to clarify, this is the correct document, right? Okay. Okay, number 12. So it's saying, finally, I want my sons to be closer to the game. So for this one, it's talking about whether we should begin a new paragraph or we shouldn't. Wait, I don't think 12 was one of the questions, right? Was it? In the homework? I don't think it was. Yeah, it wasn't. So, yeah. So do you still want me to do this, or can we just move on? Let's just do the questions that were in the homework. Okay, so let's do 13. So 13 is saying, so this one's a grammar question. It's saying, I don't want us to be forced to the edge of a bold stadium. Edge of a bold stadium, like the remnants of unwanted cereal. So which one would be the correct option? Well, it's clear that that A is not the right answer because it's not edge of a bold stadium. What this is meaning is that this is like a comma cutout and then we can remove it. But actually we need this, right? This is necessary information. So A is not going to be the right answer in this case. Now for B, I don't want us to be forced to the edge of a bold stadium, like, and now the comma cutout is in the like, right? Again, can we remove the like and let it still make sense? Would it still make sense if we remove this like? Because that's basically what a comma cutout means. It means that the stuff that's between the commas, we can remove and it'll still make sense. No, right? So it's definitely not going to be B, right? So it's between C and D. So the edge of a bold stadium, like, comma, the remnants of unwanted cereal. So would it make sense to put the comma after the like? Not really, right? So it's just like this question is more of just like basic grammar. Like typically you wouldn't put the you wouldn't put the comma after the like because it'll sound like this. I don't want us to be forced to the edge of a bold stadium, like, comma, the remnants of unwanted cereal, right? It's just out of place. You don't need a comma there, right? So one of the main rules for commas is that you only add it if it's necessary, right? So you don't add it to random places, right? So we've eliminated A, B, and C, so our answer should be D. But it would, and you can check it by like checking whether if we put a comma here, would it make sense, right? So let's see. I don't want us to be forced to the edge of a bold stadium, comma, like the remnants of unwanted cereal, right? This makes more sense, right? Compared to C, or when we're comparing C and D, the comma is more likely to be before the like than after the like, right? So we can use elimination for this one and say that it's D. And this is a grammar question, like commas. Does that make sense? Yes, okay. So the next question that was asked was, let's see. Okay, I think it was 21. Okay, which of the choices would not be acceptable here? Right, so this question right here. So she carefully cut a piece of cotton cloth from a large bolt of the material. So does A make sense? Is it grammatically correct, and in terms of syntax, is it correct? Like structure. Yes, right? So since it's asking for which would not be acceptable here, this would be the wrong answer, right? Because it's saying which one is not right. That's basically what it's asking. And for the second one, she cut careful a piece of cotton cloth from a large bolt of material. So careful, right? So when we're talking about cut, careful does not properly modify or describe cut, right? Carefully is a adverb, right? She cut. How is she cutting? She's cutting carefully, right? But careful is not an adverb. It can't modify the verb. It can't modify cut, right? So B would not be acceptable here. So this could be a potential answer choice, but let's just check C and D, right? So again, when we're talking about a verb here, such as cut, you need to have an adverb modify it, not something like careful, right? Not an adjective, or not careful, but it should be an adverb. Like, how did she cut it? She cut it carefully, right? Carefully is the correct adverb in this sense. And then checking C, carefully she cut. Again, carefully can be used here because it's an adverb that modifies cut, right? So C would be acceptable here, so it would be the wrong answer. And then for D, she cut with care, right? With care, although it isn't an adverb, it is modifying this because there's a with here. So it's she cut, but how did she cut? She cut with care, right? So this also would be acceptable here, right? But here it's just careful, right? There isn't she cut with care, or she cut with careful needs, or something like that. It's just careful, and careful isn't an adverb that can modify cut. So in this case, B would not be acceptable, therefore it would be the right answer. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see what else we want to. Okay, let's go to 28. Was that a question? Or 25, my bad. Okay, 25. So my package was then, again, this is also like a grammar question. My package was then passed to the next person in line, who with equal care, he sealed its edges with small circles of melted real wax, which was quickly hardened in place. So who with equal care, so the who is already here, right? So it's saying my package was then passed on to the next person in line, who with equal care. Since it's already saying the subject here, or the person who's doing the verb, who with equal, the next person in line, right? Next person in line, who with equal care, there's no need to have a he here, right? Because it already says the next person in line, who, right? So we don't need to have another pronoun here since we already have the noun. We already have the next person in line, right? So there's no need for the he here. So we know that A is not an option here because it's wrong. Then for this one, my package, let's try B. My package was passed on to the next person in line, who with care to seal its edges with small circles of melted wax, which quickly hardened in place. Now for this one, if we just eliminated this and wrote care to seal, this isn't a independent sentence anymore. It's because it's saying my package was then passed on to the next person in line, who with care to seal its edges with small circles of melted wax, which quickly hardened in place, right? So this right here, this wouldn't even make sense because it's not a complete, like, it's not a complete sentence in this case. If we just have care to seal, it wouldn't even be proper format, right? Because here's how it's saying. It's just saying it gives us an independent clause, right? But then without a comma or anything, it just gives us, if we just had care to seal, it wouldn't make sense because this would right here would not be an independent clause right here. It would be a dependent clause. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? If it doesn't, just say so I can repeat it. So all I'm saying here is that if we replace this with care to seal, it would be, my package was then passed on to the next person in line, who with equal care to seal its edges with small circles of melted wax, right? That's not really a complete sentence, right? It's a dependent clause now. If we had care to seal here, this whole thing would become a dependent sentence. It can't be a sentence on its own. So B would be wrong. And then my package was then passed to the next person in line, who with equal care sealing its edges with small circles of melted wax, which quickly hardened in place. Again, C is also going to be wrong, because if we had care sealing, again, that would become a dependent sentence, and it can't be a sentence on its own. So C would be wrong, and it's just D. I think in the answer key, it put that question 25 was H, so maybe, yeah, I think that was a mistake. It's supposed to be D. So, yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Moving on to 31. Okay. 31. Okay, this one. So it's saying, which of the following choices, all true, would best support the claim made in the preceding sentence while remaining consistent to the focus of paragraph 1? Okay. So the preceding sentence is, the actors who perform in television commercials are some of the most fortunate people in the show business, but their faces aren't as well known as most movie actors. So let's just skip this and then read the next sentences to give us an idea. Television commercials are big business. The average 2-minute national commercial has a shooting budget greater than budgets for some movies. A performer could live for a year on the wages earned from a single commercial, right? So this paragraph is mainly talking about how people who are working commercial are paid a lot, right? They're paid a lot, and it's a great show business. And it's mainly about money, right? It's not more about the fame, but it's talking about how the budgets are big, they could live for a year on the wages earned, and they're fortunate, right? So it's mainly talking about money, right? So which one would make sense? Well, but their faces aren't as well known as most movie actors. Okay, that has nothing to do with what is being talked about after the sentence, right? So A is not the right answer. If they're lucky, these actors can move from commercials to film. Again, the focus of this paragraph is not talking about comparing commercials to films or talking about fame of the people who are in commercials, but more about like the money that they get, right? So it's not B. C is talking about, but the fact remains that actors in television commercials work just as hard as their craft as do most movie actors. Again, the focus of this paragraph is not talking about, and nowhere here it talks about movie actors or talking about how hard they work, right? It's mainly talking about money, right? So C would not be the right answer. And that leaves us with D, which is, again, it's going to be right because it's talking about money. It's talking about performers who act in commercials are generally paid more than most movie actors, right? And again, here it is talking about budget. It's talking about wages. It's talking about being fortunate people, right? So it's in the focus of this paragraph is not talking about like the actual acting or how hard they work, right? But it's talking about money, right? They're paid more, right? So in this case, it'll be D. Does that make sense? Okay. Then 35. Okay. Performers in Hollywood. Okay, so this question, it's talking about which of the choices most appropriately characterizes the nature of getting cast for a part as described in paragraph 4. Right? So in paragraph 4, Okay, so this is paragraph 4. So mainly it's talking about so this is the question that we're looking at, so let's just skip this sentence and then read the rest. The average performer is casting in only a tiny proportion of the commercials they're auditioning for. Although performers are picked for one commercial a year, they're considered lucky, right? So that's just a key word that we just found. Lucky. What else is a tiny proportion? Picked, right? So these are all key terms to say that, is it more like a day in the beach? No, right? It's not. It's more about like being lucky, right? Which one of these talks about how they're being picked, it's lucky, it's a tiny proportion? Well, the best word that goes with that context is B. So 35 should be B. Yeah, I think that, yeah, 35 should be B, so just, yeah, should be B. I might be wrong here. Okay. Then for 43, okay. Which of the following statements, if added here, would best reinforce for the reader the main points made in paragraph 5? So we add a sentence here on the point made in paragraph 5. So the frustrations of being a commercial actor are enormous. For the patient, persistent, and lucky performer, though, the financial rewards more than compensate for the many disappointments. Performers are paid roughly $600 per day of shooting. However, the real money comes from the form of residuals. Performers are paid each time their commercial airs on television. More than $50,000 could be earned by a commercial if a performer runs for a year. Not bad for 2 days' work, right? So, which would reinforce the idea? So which one is talking? So how you answer this question is basically the one that restates or states in another way what is being talked about here, right? So mainly it's talking about like financial rewards compensating for disappointments, for patient, persistent, lucky, and like the money, the value of money, right? So the one that goes with that is definitely not B, right? Because it's not the focus of this paragraph. The point of adding a sentence here is not to introduce a new idea, but it's to reinforce an idea that's already in the paragraph. So B would not be the right answer here because it's introducing a new idea that it isn't fair for a few lucky actors to get appeared on the commercial. And C is actually the exact opposite of what it's talking about, because it's saying, therefore, the financial rewards for appearing in commercials are meager in comparison to the efforts of those who perform in the commercials. Again, that's not really what it's talking about. It's talking about the rewards are very, very large, are very compensating for the many disappointments. So this is exactly the opposite of what's here. So obviously it's not reinforcing the idea. And then D, it's not really talking about how they earn huge sums of money for working only 2 days, right? That's not the focus of here. It's not saying that it's easy work, right? It clearly says here that it's for the patient, persistent, and lucky performer, right? So D goes against that, so it's not going to be D. So the only answer that's left is A, and again, A is talking about how luck and perseverance can lead to impressive compensation. That's exactly stated in this sentence. So since it's directly stated, so one of the tips for ACT is that mainly for like the passage questions, but also for the English, is that the answer will be directly stated in the paragraph or in the passage. So you don't need to make any inferences. It'll already be stated in the paragraph. You just have to find it. So ACT is all about looking for like locators, looking for words, looking for sentences that that lead you to the correct answer. So that's just a tip for the ACT. Especially when we go to the reading passage, it'll directly be stated there. You have to search. That's like for the reading, it's no inferences, like come up with a conclusion yourself. It's just look at what's in the passage, try to find it, and try to answer questions based on the passage. That's all it is. Okay. So we'll move on to 45. So suppose the writer has been asked to write a brief essay illustrating some of the advantages and disadvantages of being an actor in television commercials. So, does this essay successfully fulfill the assignment, right? So does the essay talk about both like the bad or the frustrating stuff or the disadvantages and the advantages, or no? Like, firstly, let's come up with whether it's yes or no. What do you guys think? Is it yes or no? Does it talk about the disadvantages anywhere here? It mainly talks about advantages, but does it talk about any disadvantages? Well, let's see. So, as a result, it has been fierce. So they are saying that it is fierce, right? Yeah, it does mention that it's hard to get a role here. And it says that it's like a lottery, right? So there's a slim chance of getting selected. It's really hard to get selected. So that's one thing that we can look for in the answer choices, that there's like a slim chance of getting selected. And so that's one thing that they're looking for. So let's look for the explanation that works. So this is one of the disadvantages, but the advantage is that you get paid a lot, right? If you're lucky and you're persistent. So those are the two main things that this article or this passage is focusing about. So let's see which answer choice goes with that. Okay. So it's not C, right? It's saying that they live as easy. That's not the focus. C is not the focus here. The essay focuses on different types of actors and how, okay, so it's not talking about the different types of actors, right? It's mainly talking about how it is a business that could make you, that does have a lot of money involved, but it's for the lucky and persistent people who get to, who have that reward, right? So it's not D, right? And so it's either A or B, right? So we know that it's yes. So actually, one tip would be here is that if you're not sure whether it's yes or no, then look for the explanation first, right? Because in this case, all of the explanations are different, right? So you can first check at which one, look at the explanations and try to find the correct explanation, and then you can look at whether it's yes or no, right? Usually it'll be like this. It'll be like yes because A, yes because B, no because A, no because B, right? That's usually how it'll be. Like in this case, it's not, right? So in these type of questions, what I'd recommend you doing is that you first find whether A or B is right, and then see which whether yes or no corresponds to A or B, if that makes sense. Like in this case, you can't exactly say whether it's yes or no by just looking at it, right? You have to find out which explanation works, right? Clearly, B does not work, right? C does not work, D does not work. So you know that the explanation for A is right, and therefore A would be the answer. Does that make sense? Like if you're confused that whether it's A or whether it's yes or no, just look at the explanation and try to find the right answer. Does that make sense? Okay. And sometimes it is, sometimes if you're sure whether it's yes or no, like if you 100% know that it's yes and 100% know that it's no, then you can first check, like first you can eliminate based on yes or no and then go to the explanations. But most of the time it would be best to look at the explanations first and see which one's right. It's based on whatever works for you, right? Some like strategies work for some people, and then other strategies like don't. So it's all based on what's comfortable for you. And then, so we'll just quickly go over 61 and 75 and then do lecture notes. So, where is it? Okay, whenever I tell friends about the 10 years I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska, I find myself focusing not on the desolate the wilderness beauty, nor on the frigid Arctic temperatures, period, but on drastic differences in the daylight hours of summer and winter. Okay, firstly, we know that A is not right because this is a dependent clause, and you can't have a dependent clause by itself. So, A is not the right answer. Moving on to, let's look at D. Now remember that a semicolon is just a substitute for a period, right? So again, if we put a semicolon here, again, this is a dependent clause. You can't have it by itself. So semicolon cannot work, right? A semicolon is just a substitute for a period, right? So if a period doesn't work, a semicolon's not going to work. And C, okay, so the main difference between B and C is the comma here. Again, one important tip is that you only add a comma if it's necessary, right? And also if it's placed in the proper place, right? In this case, if we put but and then a comma afterwards, like there's no need for this comma here, right? So when we're comparing B and C, there's no need for the comma here. So C isn't exactly the right answer, right? So you only add a comma in the ACT where it's necessary. You can't just add it everywhere, right? Does that make sense? And also, like the comma kind of seems out of place here. So when we're comparing B and C, B would be more accurate. Okay, moving on to 75. Okay, these comments make me realize perceptions are relative. I think Michigan winter days are rather long, right? So this is a semicolon. So first let's check whether this is right. So a semicolon, again, is just a substitute for a period here. So let's see whether it makes sense. These comments make me realize perceptions are relative, period. I think Michigan winter days are rather long. So it seems right. Like here we have an independent clause. Here we also have an independent clause which can be by itself and can be without, can have a period here. So A does seem right. Let's check the other ones. These comments make me realize perceptions are relative. I think Michigan winter days are rather long. Okay, this is a run-on sentence, right? They're just having two independent sentences without any punctuation, which is also wrong because it's a run-on sentence here. And again, you can't have a comma here because you can't combine two independent sentences with a comma, so C is wrong. And then D, if we add a because I think here, because I think, if we add that here, the second sentence also becomes a dependent clause, so D wouldn't work. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So that was it for the homework review. So we'll quickly go over the lecture notes. We'll finish off at around 2, and then you guys need to time yourselves for, I believe, let me just check how many questions there are. Okay, so there's 45 questions. Hold on. So you guys will have about like 27 minutes. You guys should time yourself for the classwork for about 27 minutes. And then you can take like 3 minutes to like bubble in your answers online. So is everyone clear on how to access the online bubble sheet? Any questions on that, or you guys good? Good? Okay. So this will be for classwork. So after we go over lecture notes, you guys should time yourself. And again, Kalyan Uncle will be checking. So Kalyan Uncle, I won't be checking because I have like a tournament, but he will be checking to see whether everyone has responded. And again, this is important for like star student and stuff like that. So make sure you do put in your answers, right? So you'll just be doing this offline, okay? So there's no other difference. You guys will just be doing this offline. Were awards for last semester put in? I think it was. It was put in. I'll show you the. I think I can send it to you. It was put in. So yeah, we'll go back to that. Okay. So again, this is our second week for English. So again, all of the sections are English, math, reading, and science. English is we're gonna do for 2 sessions, so this is our second session. Next, we're gonna move on to math, which is like it's basic math, right? So actually, in some tests, math section is really easy. Some tests, the math section is hard, right? So it varies. You just need to remember basic tips, right? There isn't really any like specific difficult formulas. It's not like calculus is going to appear on the math ACT. And you can also use calculators. Graphing calculator is permitted on the ACT. So if you guys feel like you don't know a graph, if you don't have a function, you don't know something about a function, you can just graph it and find the answer if it's easy for you. So we're going to move on to English. So the grammar style questions are a main question type here, and it's mainly like the ones that don't have a question, like if it just moves on to the answer choices A, B, C, and D, and it doesn't have a question here, like a specific question, you know that this is a grammar question. So most of the questions on the ACT are grammar style questions. So some concepts that are going to appear on the grammar style questions are sentence fragments, which are generally those that don't have enough components to be considered full sentences, right? So an example would be like, it's basically a dependent clause. It can't stand on itself, be there by itself. It's not an independent sentence. And they're generally, they don't have enough components to be considered full sentences, or because they begin with conjunctions or relative pronouns that prohibit them from standing alone, right? For example, the cat sitting next to her is not a complete sentence. It's a dependent sentence, right? Because there's a subject, but there isn't a proper verb, right? Cat sitting is not a verb. You need to have like cat is sitting or something like that in order for it to have all the parts to be a independent sentence. Right, it doesn't have a proper predicate. And a second type is like, although the cat sat next to her, right? The cat sat next to her by itself is a independent sentence. But when we add this although in here, it turns into a dependent sentence because it's now like, although the cat sat next to her, you need to say something after that, right? You need to be like, oh, the cat, blah, blah, blah. You need to say something. Although here turns the independent sentence that was originally independent, but it turns into a dependent sentence when you add that although here. There is a subject and predicate, but you have this transition sentence or conjunction, transition word or conjunction here that prohibits it from being independent now. But if you add a comma after it, then it would make sense. Although the cat sat next to her, right? So one way you can distinguish between like sentence types like this is whether there's a presence of a comma after it, right? If there isn't a comma after it, it's a run-on, or if it's a dependent sentence, it's a sentence fragment. But if you have a comma here, it becomes a independent sentence. And here's a table of words that cause a group of words not to be a standalone sentence. The highlighted words can be fixed by adding a comma, right? So you guys can take a look at this. Okay, run-on sentences are the opposite of sentence fragments. These phrases are not separated properly with punctuation and conjunctions, and thus do not qualify as sentences, right? So if there are two pieces of a phrase that can both be sentences on their own, they must be separated by a period, semicolon, or dash, generally in that order of preference, right? So it's basically a run-on sentence is just two independent sentences without any punctuation. Between. Like you need to have a comma or something that separates the two sentences, but in this case you don't, right? For example, my cat is orange, his name is Bob, right? These are two separate sentences. It can be like my cat is orange and his name is Bob, right? But since there isn't any punctuation in between that separates it, it becomes a run-on sentence. Right? So you can put a dash here, a semicolon here, or a period here. If you put a comma here, it's wrong because you can't have a comma separating two independent sentences. So the use of a comma would be wrong. Now, conjugating verbs. So there's two acceptable formats for conjugating past verbs on the ACT. So that's no helping verb and a past tense. So for example, would be like she ate, right? You don't need a helping verb here. The second one would be like she was eating or something like that, or she had eaten, right? You have some helping verb here, and then you have a form of the verb in the past participle. But one main thing is that you can never have it in like the plain past tense with a helping verb. You can't have she had ate, right? You either have she ate or she had eaten. You can't have she had ate. Do you guys all know what like a past participle and then just plain past tense, the difference is? The past tense is just like the plain conjugation. So like if we have I ate, you ate, we ate, but past participles like I had eaten, you had eaten, we had eaten, like that. That's the main difference. So you can never have a helping verb with the plain past tense. You can't say she had gave up. That's not correct. Now for possessives, here is a chart with like the different possessives. So you have your for like it's for your, it's here, and notice that you can't have a apostrophe here, right? Because apostrophe is it is, right? It's not for possession. Whose and their, right? You can't have a apostrophe in your, you can't have apostrophe in its, you can't have apostrophe in whose, or you can't have apostrophe in their, because this all the points like wait are past participles grammatically. He had eaten, that is correct, because you can have a helping verb with a past participle. But if you said something like he had ate, that would be wrong because this isn't a past participle, but it's just like a plain past tense. Okay. Right. So try not to get possessions and contractions confused, because the point of the apostrophe here is just like to combine you and are. It is, who is, they are. The point of the apostrophe here is to combine those things. But a possession is to say that something belongs, like you're the owner of something. Right, for example, here is your, and then here is you are, or your. Which one would be right here? Yeah, it would be your, right? Because it's talking about possession, right? Because you are, it's basically saying here is you are box, right? That doesn't make sense. So the second is not right. So your would be right, not you are. Now, who versus whom, so this is an important tip. So the best rule to follow when choosing between who and whom is replace the word him and he. If the sentence with he sounds better, your answer is who. If the sentence with him is better, your answer is whom, right? So for example, to who or whom were you speaking? That's basically the one way you can check that is to say, to him were you speaking, or to he were you speaking, right? And then you can reword it to say, were you speaking to he or were you speaking to him, right? So you can just reword the syntax of the question to this form and then check whether it makes sense, right? To who or whom were you speaking? To him were you speaking would turn into were you speaking to him, or to he were you speaking to he, right? Which one sounds better? Obviously this one does, right? You wouldn't say were you speaking to he, right? So in this case, you would use whom, not who. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Okay, much versus many. So much will be used when you can't count a quantity. Many is used when you can count a quantity. For example, you would say there's too much sun. You wouldn't say there is too many suns or something like that. But for cats, you wouldn't say there is too much cats or something. You would say there are too many cats because you can count the number of it. And then another thing is that whenever you have something like there would have or they should have, you can never put there would of, right? Even though like when we speak it, you would say there would have, there could have, or something like that. You never would actually write that. It's could have, right? So I would have helped, right? When we speak, we say I would have helped, but I wasn't home. But when we write it down, the correct syntax or the correct grammar, the correct word choice here would be I would have helped. Would have is not a word. So comparatives and superlatives. So words like most, less, shorter are called comparatives and superlatives, and they're used to qualify certain traits. Take bad, for example. Calling something bad doesn't tell us anything about how bad the thing is, right? So basically, it's basically just used to compare things, right? For example, this is worse than that. This is more. This is more. This is nicer than that. This is better than that, right? So when we're trying to talk about how bad a thing is or how good, how nice is it, you use comparatives and superlatives. A comparative is to just compare one object to another object, right? So for that, you can say worse than or better than, right? So when you're comparing two things, you want to say than, right? Because you want to say this is better than that, right? But for superlatives, you don't need a than because you're saying it is the worst, right? Superlatives is the most, right? Like she is the nicest, she is the worst, or something like that. You're not comparing two things specifically, but you're saying overall this is the most. Like the quantity, how bad or how good it is like it's like the worst thing. Like she is the worst, she is the best, right? So overall, which one is the worst, or which one has the most, if that makes sense. So comparative would be if it's like a one syllable word like big, you would say bigger. But if it's more than one syllable like eerie, you wouldn't say eerier, right? You would say more eerie or less eerie. Same thing for superlatives. If it's one syllable, you can say kindest, like that. But if it's more than one syllable, like subtle, you wouldn't say subtlest, right? You'd say least subtle. Okay. And then prepositional idioms. So idioms are just pieces of languages that mean something other than what is said, right? So it's just like in grammar, there's no like reason, there's no explanation for it, but it's just like proper sentences or proper pieces of language that are in the language, but if we translate it to another language, it wouldn't make sense. For example, if we say like when pigs fly, if we translated that to another language and said it in like Japanese or something, they wouldn't understand what it means because it's specific to the English language, right? Same thing for when my computer died, right? Like that would make sense here, but if we translate to something else, it would not make sense, right? So they're like inconsistencies in the English language. They're correct, but there's no reason why they're correct, right? For example, if we have to be on time, like that, like literally that wouldn't make sense, right? To be on time, but it's just correct. It's just like an inconsistency in the English language that's correct, right? And if you're familiar with the English language, if you're like fluent in it, like I think we all are, then you're probably already familiar with most of the idioms that are going to pop up, right? So for questions with idioms, like for usual questions, we wouldn't say like that, like for usual questions, we wouldn't say, okay, try to find out which one feels right, right? For usual questions, like grammar questions, we wouldn't say, okay, try saying it out loud and whichever one is right is the right answer. Don't do that for grammar questions, but for idioms, you want to make sure that you do that because it's just inconsistencies. There's no like grammatical like way to find an idiom, right? It's just whichever one feels right, whichever one you're already familiar with, right? For grammar, don't do that. For grammar, don't be like, oh, this one sounds right when I'm saying it out loud, when I put the comma here, right? That's for like specifically for commas, you can't just be like, oh, when we say it out loud, we put the comma here, so therefore I'm going to place a comma. That does not work for the ACT. For the ACT, for grammar, do not just be like, oh, when I read it, when I say something out loud, this is how I'd say it, so this one should be the right answer. That's not going to be right in this case. Yeah. But for idioms, it's like there's no grammatical way to solve, so you have to just like find which one feels right. Okay, and redundancy is a very important like part of the ACT because they always do this. They always have like a sentence, like there'll be a sentence right here. For example, my house is next to the library. My house is in the space next to the library, right? There'll always be, in the ACT, there's always, like, there'll be a sentence here, and then there'll be the dash part, right? The part that's underlined. That part, what they always do is that it'll already have something that's stated in another part of the question, right? And if it does that for any of the options, if there's already a part that's stated in another part of the sentence, like, even if it's an adjective, like, for example, if it already said the beautiful flower was very beautifully subtle or something like that, you don't want to choose the option that already repeats something that's already part of the sentence. You always want to choose the most concise and non-redundant answer, right? For example, here, if we have these two sentences, my house is next to the library, my house is in the space next to the library, there's no point in choosing the second option because it's literally in the space doesn't really add anything. It's just repeating next, right? It's just another way to write next, right? My house is in the space next to the library. There's no need to do that, right? So when we're comparing these two options, just find which one is the most concise answer, the concise and less redundant. Especially when they give us questions where a part of the underlined portion is already repeated in another part of the sentence, that's going to be wrong. Immediately, you know that that's wrong. Like, even if a small line or a small adjective or one word is repeated, you know that's the wrong answer. It has to be something that's not already written in the sentence. So only include extra words when the words are added to, when the words add extra information. And since the second choice adds text, it must also add information. Adding text without information automatically disqualifies an answer choice. Does in the space next to really provide more information than next to does? Not really, right? It basically is just another way to say next to. So since this doesn't provide any new information, it's redundant and it's less concise, it's more wordy, right? So we know that that's the wrong answer. So that's basically it for the lecture notes. So again, just a small tip is that in questions like this, choose the most concise but grammatically correct answer. Choose the one that is less redundant. And yeah, these are basically like combining what we learned in the last session and in this session. That's basically all the tips you need for the ACT English. The main parts are like punctuation or like grammar. commas like that, and also such questions like these, like the ones where it's like talking about vocabulary or something like that. That's mainly what it's going to talk about. So we're going to end the meeting right now. So what I want you guys to do is I will publish the classwork right now. So 1 second. I'm going to publish the classwork. So take 27 minutes exactly to write it down on a piece of paper. Time yourselves with 27 minutes. And then in 3 minutes, or like the last 3 minutes, last 5 minutes, whenever you're done, just upload it into the classwork, the online bubble sheet, and you should get your score immediately. And again, homework is due the Tuesday before class. So next week we will review the homework and classwork and lecture notes. Yes, before 3. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you go maybe 10 minutes after 3, but try to finish by 3. Like, don't do it tomorrow or something. Do it today. Okay. So yeah, we're basically done. Just make sure to finish the classwork. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe and like. If you have any questions, you can email info@agoramatrical.org or comment below and we'll reply back. Maybe. And if you want to see practice things or anything about us, you can visit our website, which is basically the end of the email, but without the info and the end. So bye!